Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the I am the reader tag. So this tag, I guess, was actually created by Penguin Random House in order to promote a new book. And it started going around. I think that Jim over at Jim's Books Reading and Stuff did it, and he tagged a bunch of people, including, I believe, Erica from Passage of Time. I think he tagged her, and then she was kind enough to actually tag me. And if you haven't seen her channel, she talks mostly, not exclusively, mostly about nonfiction history, especially the Middle Ages, and she's got great thoughts on those books. I highly recommend that, especially if you're a nonfiction reader, a history reader, that you check out her channel. So these are, I guess, mostly just prompts about being a reader. So we'll go through these and discuss. And before so, I should just in case people are new to my channel, the empty shelves behind me are due to the fact that I am kind of in a limbo as far as trying to move houses. It's been quite the headache. So my library is basically almost completely packed away in boxes. So I'm just trying to do some easy tags where I'm not going to have to hold up any books. Although there's a couple of these that I kind of wish I could hold them up, but won't be doing so today. All right, so the first question is, choose one word that describes being a reader. Now I'd seen Erica had said curious, and I think that's actually a very good one. Being curious about the world, about people, how others tick, curious about stories and how they work on me. All those things I am curious about, and they certainly bring me back to books. I would agree with what she said there. Now, there's another one that I wouldn't expect to have said, except a couple of years ago. Actually, when I was in graduate school, my graduate advisor, she said something to me that it sounded weird at first, and I totally didn't believe it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I think she's got something there. And we were talking about how I was talking about feeling compelled to read things, especially to kind of like really read them to understand and read, not to just read a description about something like Foucault or something, to actually read the works. And she mentioned something. She's like, well, that's because you're a guilty person. Like, you're basically, I'm not guilty of things, but I am ridden with the feeling of guilt, that I'm compelled to read things because I feel guilty having not read them. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what she said. It wasn't her exact wording, but she definitely used the word guilt. And at first I was like, that sounds just absolutely insane. Why would I feel guilty? But then over time, as more and more I thought about it, I'm like, I think she was onto something. And I do think that identifies a certain feeling that I have when I approach books. Yes, I'm curious, but there's also a guilt in me for not having read the thing. And I don't know if there's any other emotion that, or a word for an emotion that I more pointedly feel sometimes. So it's a weird choice, I understand, but I am going to say, in addition to curious, I am also going to say guilty, or guilt-ridden, I think is more appropriate, because I'm not guilty of things, I just feel guilt. So that's what I'm going to go with that first one. Hopefully that made sense. Number 2, what is the first book you fell in love with? At a very young age, I love the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series, especially the illustrations, but of course the stories themselves as well, which was a retelling of basically spooky folklore tales with amazing illustrations by Stephen Gale. And I loved those. And even when I still have an omnibus collection, but whenever I see them, I just get hit with a wave of nostalgia. I also used to get the Scholastic ghost books, tales of ghosts and like ghostly encounters and true stories of things and hauntings and places, and I love those quite a bit. And another book that I know when I was in 2nd grade that I really fell in love with, and that was Roald Dahl's The Witches. I just remember sitting out on a lawn chair in the backyard and just reading that book from cover to cover one day. I think probably one of the first times I ever did that. And it's a book that stayed with me, in my psyche for a very, very long time. So I don't know which of those came first necessarily. I'm guessing it was the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but they were all around the same time, and those all had a pretty big impact on me, not just in making me a lifelong horror fan, but I also do credit my love of ghost stories with my growing love of history as I was growing up. So many ghost stories, you can't tell a story about a ghost without explaining why that ghost is there, surmising what happened to the ghost, how did they die? How did they live? What time period were they from? What are they wearing, right? Is it a woman wearing a bonnet? Is it a guy wearing a zoot suit? Whatever it is. And whether those stories are true or not is kind of besides the point. As I was interested in those ghost stories as a kid, I was also learning history. It was kind of a backdoor way of learning history, but I think that's one of the things that gave me a love of history. So my love of horror, my love of history, I kind of see as a symbiotic thing, that they were growing out of the same seed, right? they branched off into two different directions, but the seeds were there with those early books that I read. Number 3, hardback or paperback, ebook or audio. I don't have an e-reader, so I don't have really much experience with e-readers, and I'm not against them. It's not a principal thing. It's just I just haven't bought an e-reader. And usually, if I have any extra income, I don't think to buy an e-reader. I might try and ask for one for like this Christmas or something like that. See if somebody wants to get me one, because I certainly wouldn't mind. I actually would just like a decent iPad to work off of, but it's just not in the cards right now. Audiobooks, I do like audiobooks quite a bit. I think that they can be a very valuable way to consume books. Now, if you don't want to call it reading, don't call it reading. That's fine. But, I think when people start debating this, I think it's important to realize that throughout most of human history, the way people consume books was through listening. You would have one person reading to a room or a family or something like that. I mean, most people are consuming books through listening rather than actually physically reading the page. And I wouldn't say that those people who were listening were any less knowledgeable or understanding of that book than the person who was reading. Now, yes, the person reading might be making certain choices for you as far as the way characters sound, but I do think that listening to audiobooks is a skill that can be built, and you can start to kind of block that stuff out, and you can listen to the way the person is describing it, but rework it in your head. You don't have to be slavishly dependent on the person who's listening. I find audiobooks especially useful when it comes to reading something that I'm not used to and doing immersive reading. I really like that. It helps me focus for a while. I pick up on maybe an older style of prose, language usage, maybe certain pronunciations of words that I'm not familiar with. So I do think that audiobooks are very invaluable. I think they get sometimes too much bad of a rap, but I like them quite a bit. And when it comes to the other selections, paperback, I prefer to read. Especially I like the floppy paperbacks. That's what I like to read, but for the shelf, I like the hardback. I just like the way it looks, the presentation. That's for posterity, it's the hardback, but for the rough and tumble abuse of reading, paperback. So I do like to have, I know Jason Harrigan, I think, has called these, and I've called them that for a long time too, is reading copies. Sometimes I'll have a really nice copy for a shelf, and I'll have a bad copy of the book that I got like at a library book sale for 50 cents, and that's the one that I'll go through and I'll read, and then I'll pass that one on when I'm done with it, and leave the nice one on my shelf. So that's my answer for those ones. I have to look beyond the camera to see the computer screen that I have the questions on. How has reading shaped your identity? This is kind of a weird question. I'm not entirely sure how to answer this. I'm talking about that combination of curiosity and guilt. I think that has combined to make me a fairly voracious learner. And I am somebody who values greatly knowledge and how knowledge is disseminated and ideas. I think I have a very keen appreciation for the world that we have managed to create and how we got there and how much books are responsible for it, and literacy, and being able to send out thousands of copies of the same exact text that everybody can read it for themselves. That democratization of knowledge is something that I hold very dear. And I also found, with these empty bookshelves around me, uh, I hate looking at the empty bookshelves. I can't stand it. I don't like walking into a house and not seeing books on bookshelves. I especially hate seeing empty bookshelves, and I realize, I can't. It gets to me. uh, Not being able to go into my library and take a book off the shelf. I feel like a part of me is packed away into cardboard right now, not having access to it. So I know that, my library, the books, they are a part, at least, of my identity. So I don't know how else to put that, but they're in some ways they're an extension of me, not just my identity that goes along with my personality, my interests. People can walk into my library, see my shelves, and they can see me in a whole different way. Not that most people do. Most people couldn't care less about my bookshelves or what I have on them. I think everybody has that ideal scenario where somebody comes in and said, "Oh, I can't wait to look through your bookshelves and let's start talking about the books that you've read." Nobody does that. I'm sure that there's some people watching this who have had that's happened to them. Steve Donahue has the kind of guests that would do that, but for the most part, nobody cares about any kind of book that I have on my shelf. But nevertheless, some people, if you have a personal library, the expression is people being like an open book. Well, you can at least be like the spine of a book, and it says something about you and your interests. So, it definitely reflects my identity in certain ways. So, sorry, that was a very rambly way to answer that, but there it is. And number 5, what do you read when you need to be comforted? I don't really understand this question entirely. I don't read to be comforted. If anything, I would rather read to be taken out of my comfort zone, to be challenged in some way. I don't consider learning to be comfortable. I mean, I also read like Star Trek fiction. It's not like that's challenging me in large ways. I mean, that's comfort food, sort of literarily. I guess, that kind of thing, maybe Star Trek fiction is comforting, but only because it's familiar and fairly predictable. But I don't read it to be comforted. I read it because I just like exploring that world, and that franchise, that universe that's been built up. Kind of a weird way to answer that, but also I think it's kind of a weird question for me, at least. Number 6, who taught you how to be a reader? Nobody really taught me. I don't think this is asking who taught you how to read. This is like to be a reader, to identify as a reader. Neither of my parents are much of readers. My father read very few books. My mother occasionally will read a book, but they don't have a bookshelf in their house that has like books on it. They've never had need for something like that. But what they did do very well for me, what they did right by, is make sure that when I was a kid, I was always surrounded by books. When I was really young, they had those little golden books, which I think got really cheap. And it would be things like The Little Engine That Could, and the Tugboat, whatever, nursery rhymes. But I used to love those books, and I would look through them. And I mentioned Scholastic. Whenever the Scholastic catalog came around, and I wanted like these collections of ghost stories, they never said no. They'd always let me get books. So they always indulged my interest in books. And I think surrounding a kid with books makes a big difference. My son loves books, and I think so much of it just had to do with the fact that we always presented books as a given. Like, no, our house is one that has lots of books, and we go to book sales and we choose books and we talk about books, and books are just a part of our daily lives, and we've always treated it that way with our kids. And my daughter, she's still learning how to read. She's 6 years old. But, she's excited by books still, and I hope she doesn't lose that. My son is 10, and at this point, he still likes books. He's still into it. And I think, I didn't have that example growing up that I'm trying to provide for my kids, but I did have lots of books. I think that's part of it. As I got older, I would discover things like Stephen King books, and, the kind of more mature forbiddenness of those, like Forbidden Fruit. all those things. And it's just, I learned that, I already talked about this before, being kind of, I guess, curious and guilty, books is how you satisfy that, or at least how you try to. So that's kind of the stuff that made me a reader. It wasn't any one person with an example. I've always been, I think, the most voracious reader of anybody that I knew, at least close to me. So, it was just something that I kind of developed over time. Trying not to be too rambly with these questions. Number 7, describe your dream reading lounge. Lounge. If it's a dream, I'm going beyond that. I'm going to picture an old library with bookcases reaching to tall ceilings, large stained glass windows letting in natural light, lots of intricately carved wood of mythological creatures and maybe like whimsical book characters as well. Kind of like, remember outside the law school at Yale, you'll see they're not gargoyles. They look like gargoyles at first, and you get up close to them and they're like students reading books. That's the kind of thing that I want. And I want nice comfy chairs. I want a nice wooden desk that has a decanter of smooth aged brandy, and big fireplace with a roaring fire, and for good measure we'll throw some swords hanging over that fireplace as well. That sounds like a good place for me to sit there and read. And the last question, what book changed the way you act or see the world? Once again, I can kind of relate to what Erica said. She showed some college texts that were basically ethnographic studies, I believe, sociology, anthropology as well. And I also say that those things did certainly help to see my world in a different way. So I'm going to echo kind of what she said. Being able to look at sociological and anthropological studies let me see how different people can think. And of course, when I say that, I think you can automatically think of foreign countries, and that's certainly true, in foreign cultures. But I'm also thinking just my fellow Americans, and making me not so quick to judge or to assume things. I remember one book that really struck me when I was in college that I read as an undergrad. I think it was an intro to anthropology or intro to sociology class. I don't remember which one. But it was Sidewalk by Mitch Duneier. I believe it was published in the late 90s, but it's a sociologist who spent like 5 years basically talking to and in a way studying the street vendors of, I think it was Greenwich Village in New York City. And we're talking about mostly African-American men who were street peddlers. And a lot of them, like there's one in particular who I think he would resell used magazines out on the sidewalk after dumpster diving to get them. And of course, Mitch Duneier, he talks about how his own, assumptions and prejudice would have him look down on these people. But then the more he started talking to him and learning about him, he realized that, that a lot of them are actually intelligent, educated. They're doing something to make money that is not harmful to others. And a lot of them were just decent people who had a very difficult time adapting to or succeeding in the capitalist system that they're being told that they need to succeed in. And I thought that stuff was very interesting. And also how their stuff that, their situation that we can look down on and see as like, borderline criminal and undesirable actually does function to help the city in some ways. So it was a book like that helped me to just start seeing the world differently. The next time I went to New York City and I saw people, I wasn't so quick to look down. I wasn't so quick to judge. So those sorts of books, I think like Erica was also saying, do help to broaden horizons. They help you see the world through somebody else's eyes, at least a little bit. And that is humbling, it's enlightening, and definitely worth picking up a book for. So that is it. That is the I am the reader tag. Sorry, some of those answers were kind of rambly. I don't work off of a script. You just kind of get what you get with my videos. But if you stuck around this long, thank you, Booktube. And in particular, thank you, Erica, for tagging me. All right, until next time.